Welcome to another episode of the Redeemed Man podcast. I'm Nate Dewberry, director of the Redeemed, and today I have with me Stephen Pemberton. Stephen is a father, a husband, business owner, and he's also a podcaster. So, a fellow podcaster, welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to just dive into it and see how the Holy Spirit leads.
Awesome. Well, we start out with some rapid fire questions just to let our audience get to know you, loosen us up a little bit. So we'll start out with our questions. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Awesome. So a Southern boy at heart.
Yep.
Who's your hero?
Ooh. I would say, and it sounds cliche, but I would say it's my dad. And for a very specific reason. And my dad wasn't exactly the perfect dad. He wasn't the most loving dad, but I watched him sacrifice everything and be the exact opposite of his dad
Yeah.
to love me, to guide me, to do the best he could. So for me, it would be my father.
Awesome. Love that. What's your go-to pastime?
Go-to pastime? Ooh, that one. Besides business, because I love business, the go-to pastime is actually playing a board game called, well, it's a card game called Phase 10.
Okay. And what's if you gonna be laughing, what's a no fail to make you laugh?
So a no fail to make me laugh, man, there's there's so many no fails to make me laugh. I would say that one right now that's a no fail to make me laugh. I don't know if anyone else has seen them, but there's this trend going around on Instagram where it'll be a kid standing there or a person standing there and a dog will run into them, and then they'll do this picture of a dog and they'll say, "I'm such and such from the University of Alabama." And I just think it's the most hilarious thing because I love football. So to watch somebody get run over by a dog and then the dog have basically their own highlight reel and be from a university, I just think it's the funniest thing.
That's good. One of my thing is I don't know if you've seen the kook slams where people are out on the water and a wave takes them out or something. Those
Hmm.
are ones that are hard for me to not laugh at. I know it's probably bad, but it's probably when people are getting hurt. Or at least what object do you misplace the most?
That is a hard question because I'm very logical and analytical. So I put things in very specific places. I would say the one that I would lose the most is probably my headphones. I say because or actually, I'll change that. We just got back from a trip to LA and I've worn this necklace every day, this chain every day, and I have misplaced it and I'm still looking for it. So I'm gonna say that.
What's your favorite Bible verse?
Favorite Bible verse? That is also a loaded question because it changes. I think that the top of mind would be Hebrews 11:1.
Yeah.
I think that when you sit there and even when you look at Second Corinthians, Paul talks about it more, but when you talk about faith being the substance of things you can't see, I think that especially in most people's lives, there's seasons that you walk through that you're being guided through the valley of the shadow of death where there's so many things that you can't see. So Hebrews 11:1.
Love it. Great verse. At the Redeem, one of our heartbeats is really people to share their story. We believe there's power when we're open and vulnerable and honest about what we've gone through. And I believe that we give God praise and glory when we share what He's done in our life and how He's changed and transformed us. And so, over the month of August, we're sharing our stories and talking about what it means to be restored, the hope that we have in that restoration, lives that are changed. And Stephen, you have a very powerful story about what God has done in your life. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your story if you don't mind sharing. Thanks for being on the show again, and look forward to hearing about how God has restored so much in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me. And the one thing for those of you listening or maybe seeing the video is I want to expose the hurt parts of me, the parts of me that most people will never talk about. And I hope that's okay with everyone
Yeah,
because I think that through the authenticity and vulnerability of somebody is where breakthroughs can happen for others.
exactly.
And so just diving into my story is right now I'm 29 and I've been married for almost 10 years. So 10 years in August. So cool enough that August is this time of restoration, and August is also my birthday. And when I sit there and I look back 10 years ago, so I would say, so 2012, I was graduating high school and falling in love all at once. And that's actually where I met my wife. My wife was my boss at my first ever job at the movie theater. And it was at that point in time, I wasn't really close to God. but I do know, looking back, that that was one of those Ebenezer stones that he spoke to me then. Because I just remember I got trained. This is my first ever job. I'd never had a job before. Get trained. The person who trained me quit the next day, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to do anything. And I just remember the higher up boss came to me and was like, "Hey, do you know what you're doing?" And I said, and they said, "Great. So you're the only one on this register. You're going to be running the concession stand." So I was the one charging like $4 for a bottle of water. That was me. And but I knew how to make some popcorn. Just saying. And I remember sitting
Absolutely.
there at this register and it being this experience where I had no idea what I was doing. And Brittany, my wife, she walks up to me and she says, "Hey, do you need some help?" And I'm almost in tears because I have like a line out the door and it's in the middle of the day. It's not supposed to be busy. And I said, "Yes, I need help." And I just remember she's helping me get some popcorn or something. And I turn around and I see her. And in this moment, at this exact moment, I didn't understand it. But now looking back, I understand it was the Holy Spirit. Was I looked at her and immediately it was, "That's your wife." And I went, "I'm 18. Like, I don't know if that, I don't know where that's coming from." It's like, that's the first time we've interacted. Like, she just spoke to me asking if I needed help. But why would I think that that's my wife?
Yeah.
She was dating somebody else. It wasn't as if it was this seamless process, right? But I just was crazy enough to believe that it's like, okay, I I don't know why, but I feel like that's supposed to be my person.
Yeah.
So I just pursued, and we ended up getting into a relationship. She was actually breaking off that other relationship as I was asking her, which was a cool timing. And over that span of time, we were young. We weren't close to God, either of us, so we were making poor decisions.
Yeah.
And we ended up, I asked her to marry me in December around her birthday, so a little less than a year. And I remember after asking her to marry me, it was a few months later we found out our son was coming. So we were already engaged, but we had to speed that process up. So we ended up getting married in August. And so we get married in August. I'm 20, she's 19. Our son comes along 6 months later, and she decides that she's not going back to work. So she stays home. And I said, "That's great, but I'm making 13 bucks an hour. You got to figure something out." And so she's doing an MLM, and I watch her build her social media following from zero to about 10,000. She starts making 400 bucks a month, and I was blown away. Like, I didn't know you could make 400 bucks a month working from home because I'm working in a warehouse. So I said, "Hey, you know what's better than you doing it by yourself? Two heads is better than one." So I quit. I don't know. At that point in time, I was not close to God, but I knew kind of how to pray. So I was praying and I was listening to motivational stuff, and I felt as if that's what I was supposed to do. And this is something very interesting. I don't typically talk about this part, but I feel like because I found myself in this place then, and sometimes I find myself in this place now, is so often we only see things as humans do.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is we only see things based on the result. So for me, and this has been the common thread, anytime that people knew me then talk to me now, they say, "Oh, maybe you just got excited and that's why you quit." And I tell them every time, I think the Lord told me to do it. And they said, "But you failed. You ended up losing everything and living in a basement and not being able to feed your son. So you had to mash up some dollar carrots from Walmart." It's like, but when I look at that time, if it's based on results, then there's so many stories in the Bible that the result that they were looking for, they didn't get to see.
Yeah.
Abraham looking up at the stars and the Lord telling him, "Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars." Abraham didn't get to see that. So if it's basing it on results, there's something for me that I look at that period of my life and go, there wasn't any results, but I know he told me to do it.
Mhm.
And as we're going through that process, losing everything, living in somebody's basement with giant spiders, and I hate spiders, that I remember being depressed and upset and feeling like a failure and all these emotions. And I got so bad that I didn't even want to eat because we were living with another family. They couldn't afford to keep us, and I knew that. So I'm working odd jobs. I'm trying to support them as much as I can with a couple $100 a month. And my mom, she gifts me with a box of this Nature Valley Crunch bars, like the really just the ones where you open them and the crumbs go everywhere,
Yeah.
like those Crunch bars. That's what she gave me, and that's what I ate. Like that's what I ate for lunch and dinner. I would not eat anything else, and I ate that way for about 3 to 4 months. And in that, and I'm still working. I'm working a job, and I'm just eating that stuff because I didn't feel worthy of anything else.
Yeah.
And in that time, my wife applies me for a warehouse position full time, and it would make the most money I would ever made or I'd ever made up to that point. And I remember coming home, and she says, "Hey, I applied you for this," and I get upset. because I said, why? I'm from Tennessee. I grew up in the South, and in the South, there's this stigma that you have to have a degree or you have to know somebody to get a job, to get a good job, and that's what I was told. And I told her, I said, I don't know anyone that works there.
Yeah.
I don't have any college education. What makes you think that that was a good decision? She said, I don't know why, but I feel like you're going to get it. And I said, okay. So I went in for the interview and I got it. I got the job, and that job was what pulled us out of the basement and thrust us into. We started making the most money we ever made at that point in time. We're able to move out. We have a house, and then there's so many broken pieces of me at that time that I feel like I have to basically stunt on everyone. I go buy a truck that's more expensive than the house. I'm working 16 to 21 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. So the money's there, but
Yeah.
I'm not there. There's no presence felt in the house. I mean, I have a son. I saw him once a week. I mean, I saw him on Sunday, and that was it. And I didn't really spend the time with him because I was drained. And I'm trying to gear myself up for another 16 plus hour day the very next day. And that just took such a toll. It took a toll on me physically, mentally, emotionally, because I cared so much about taking care of my family financially that I forgot that they actually need to be taken care of emotionally. And I remember very specifically my wife's number one love language is physical touch, still is to this day. And for me, physical touch was dead last. And I just remember this one point in time, she comes to me almost begging me just to hold her. And she's crying. She's like, Stephen, please just hold me. And I told her, I said, sorry, I can't be that person for you. And and I just look back at that person. I'm like, what a butthead.
Yeah.
Because that is, I just couldn't imagine being in her shoes and hearing the person that you're married to, the person who you're supposed to spend the rest of your life with, tell you that every dream you've had of a relationship is dead right there in that moment. And for me, it's like, what more do you want from me? Because I grew up in a house where my dad was not. He was very much that way, where there was no physical affection. There's no telling you I love you or I'm proud of you. It was I'm working and I'm providing the roof over your head. So you got to be grateful for that. So that's what I did. That's what I thought love meant, and I was just emulating what I thought love meant. And so I was doing that to her, and it was destroying her. And because of that, because of me not being there for her emotionally, only financially, that pushed her into an affair. She ends up, she ends up in another relationship. I find out about it, and I look back on that moment, that space and time, and I just look at how good God is.
Yeah.
And for some people listening, they're just like, that's wild. You're talking about your wife cheating on you. How could God be good in that time? Well, it did two things. One is it opened my eyes to me, because then I blamed everyone else. Before that moment, I blamed everyone else for my circumstances. I blamed everything else for why I was going this way. I blamed God for putting me in that situation. And when that happened, the only person I could blame, I couldn't even blame her. Yes, she made the choices. Yes,
Yeah.
she took the actions. But for me, I was able to connect the dots. The light bulb came on. That's like, wait, all these things that I didn't do for her that she asked repeatedly, and it wasn't crazy difficult, and I didn't do it, pushed her to that point where she was looking for an out. The other thing that I realized that God is good is when I met the other person. I was like, call him right now. I need to meet him right now. And I end up meeting up with him at a park, and I'm ready to just run. I'm just ready to punch him, right? I'm ready to punch him. And when he pulls up, Holy Spirit basically takes over in that moment. I put my hands in my pocket, and I don't even start cussing at him. I'm actually the calmest in that moment, where I'm just explaining to him what he's done to me and my family and what he's done to his own family, because his wife was there too. And in that moment, he actually said to me, he's like, I wish you would have just fought me. I wish you would have just hit me. He said, because what you just did to me was so much worse. And I remember getting back in my truck at that time, and I told him, I said, just remember what I said to you. And I got back in the truck and left. I have no idea what happened to that person. I've forgiven them. I've moved on since then. But when we look at that time, like, God was good then, because he opened my eyes to me. I was able to sit there and reconcile with my wife. We're better than we've ever been, but that was the beginning. And part of that transformation journey was we had to move. Like, that's where all this pain and all these things had happened. So we moved from Chattanooga. I got a promotion. We moved all the way to Fort Worth. And in Fort Worth, Texas, so 14-ish hours away, that's where the only people we knew, the only people we had was each other. and we didn't have much money. So we had to rely on one another, and that was this moment in time where things really started to mend.
So tell me a little bit more about that time and what God did when you stepped into that season in Fort Worth. Tell me about the transformation because you shared a little bit, like you knew about God, you can look back and see his hand, but you really weren't living for him. So what
Yep.
really was the transition, the flip in your life that's like, I'm fully surrendered, I'm all in on this?
So funny enough is we're probably, so when we get to Fort Worth, that was about 2017. So we're still probably 3 years out from my life just completely flipping. And what ends up happening in Fort Worth is so my wife and I, we started leaning on each other, and still not really too close to God. I still am not really talking to him. But I remember Easter 2018 comes around and she says, Stephen, I want to take our family to church. And I said, why? I grew up in church. I've read the Bible front to back. I said, here, let me save you some time. Jesus died on the cross and he rose again 3 days later. There you go. There's the whole Easter sermon. We can just stay home. And she said, Stephen, please, will you just go? And I said, I don't see the point, but I guess I'll do it for you. So after giving her so much heartache, I get in the car. We go over to this church. I don't know how she found it. It wasn't really close, but it wasn't too far away. And I remember we showed up late, so we walked in. Only seats left were right on the front row. And we go and we sit on the front row. The preacher comes up on stage and he looks over directly at me, points at me, and he says, I bet you thought that you were going to walk in here and hear about Jesus dying on the cross and rising 3 days later. He said, but that's not the message you're going to get today. And I was like, okay. Because at that time, I didn't believe in spiritual giftings.
Yeah.
Looking back, I realized that guy straight up just prophesied in that moment. He actually realized that, and maybe he didn't, but it was exactly God working through him to direct it towards me. And that was that light bulb moment for me with God. It's like, okay, God, you see me, you hear me even in the dark when I'm not close to you. So we started going to church, still wasn't really feeling it, still was living for the world most of the time. And I get right after Easter 2018, I get promoted again, moved to East Texas. We're going to church there. It's okay. Still not really too on fire for the Lord. And then I watch my wife take a business from 2018 to the end of 2019 to $1 million in top line sales on Amazon. And even through that process, there were so many things that the Lord was working on me with because I was still working a corporate job. The profit margins weren't great, so it wasn't like I could just quit and we could go live in Cabo or something. And at the end of 2019, whenever like we get to see the ticker stop at, I think it was a little over 1 million, and then we got to pay taxes. So we're sitting there, we're paying taxes, and I realize that it's 10% margins. We have a partner; they're taking half. We got to take half, and then with the partner, we're also putting money back into the business. I think we did not keep much. And when I sit there and I look at that, when I looked at it at that time, it was I'm working a job that makes more than this, but you made 1 million and it sounds better. And I thought, but I'm in logistics and supply chain.
Yeah.
So I understand how to fix these issues. And we were going into 2020. And especially for my wife, they bring me in to sit there and start looking at it. And I think I'm sitting there telling them, like, we need to just basically scrap it. So think about this crazy $1 million top line sales. The very next month in January, there we had basically cut everyone. We had closed that business for the most part, and we're completely rebuilding it. That way, it could be more sustainable, scalable,
Yeah.
margins higher. And then that happened in January. March, the world shuts down. So I'm still working in corporate. The world's shut down, except for apparently warehouses at Pepsi. They're not shut down because we work in crazy hours. Then I just remember things, especially in March. The boss that I had who had brought me on was a great guy. He ends up getting asked to step down, and when that happens, I take over two shifts. I'm running the day shift and the night shift by myself. I'm working with about 30 people, and I'm talking with the regional director. I'm talking with the person over the entire location. They said, "Hey, you're the guy. As soon as this position opens, you've got the job." So I'm excited. This is $100,000 a year. Like, this is what I've been hoping for. This was the dream. And even in that meantime, I was just sitting there and I was putting the work in and I was just excited for it. Then, whenever the time comes, I remember walking in one day, been doing the job for about 2, 3 months. It's May, and I walk past that office and there's somebody calls out to me. He's like, "Hey, who are you?" And I turn around and I'm like, "Who are you?" And they said, "Well, I'm your new boss." And I said, "Hold on." And I walk down the hallway. I go to the other boss's office and I say, "Hey, what happened?" And basically, because the job never opened, which is supposed to open, all that stuff, all the legalities. But that person had been demoted, and the only place he could go was that spot. And so I immediately trying to find a way out. My hometown, Chattanooga, Tennessee, a job opens. I try to get that job, but they had messed up the paperwork, so that one was off the table. Then my old boss from that location, he had got a promotion, a big one. He had a opening right below him in the same position I was already doing. He calls me, asks if I want it. He said, "If you say yes, you got it." I said, "Yes, let's do it." Cause I loved working for him. We go through the formalities, the paperwork. He calls me and says, "Hey, I hate to break it to you, but they went with this guy who's been in this job for 20 years." And I was so mad because everything that I thought I wanted was gone. Every direction that I thought was my path was gone. And I got almost depressed, I would say, because I started having anxiety attacks for the first time ever. Even walking through the affair, didn't have them, and I started having anxiety attacks, crying every single day on the way to work. And I had learned how to talk to God at this point, where I was just talking to him. I was like, "Hey God, I'm in the car for 30 minutes. Can you just hang out with me?" It's like, "All right, life kind of sucks right now. Like this sucks. This job got taken off the table. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm here." And I told God, I said, "Don't take it away from me, because this is a chance for my faith to be tested."
Yeah.
And because I've always heard faith untested can't be trusted. So I went to work one day. It's probably the end of May, and I'm standing in the mechanic shop. And in the mechanic shop that's attached to this warehouse, I feel like I hear the Lord speak to me, and He says, "You're done here." And I said, First I think I'm getting fired because it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm not. I'm supposed to be in the warehouse. I'm in this mechanic shop, and I'm just like, "Oh, I'm done where?" And the Lord said, "You're done in this job. You're not going to work a normal job again." And I said, "Are you sure?" Because the last time I quit my job, it did not go so well. And I called one of my buddies that I'd met earlier in the year, and he'd been in business for a decade. And I told him, I said, "Hey, I feel like God's telling me to quit my job." And he said, "If God's telling you to quit your job, why'd you even call me?" And I went, "My bad." I'm like, "Give me some encouragement, give me something." But I did. I ended up quitting that job. And right as I quit the job is when I got introduced to Transformation Church. My wife turned on a series called Crazy Faith. And it was right in the season when their Crazy Faith miracle was happening. And that was what spurred me to just go all in. I binge watched everything because I needed that.
Yeah.
Hey, they just got, if they can have crazy faith for something and it come through, I need that right now. I need a miracle right now. So that's when I really went all in with God, and God started working out all these different things in my life because I was still addicted to pornography, overeating, coping, playing video games like 8 hours a day. But that moment of quitting my job, coming home, getting introduced to a church that spoke to me,
Yeah.
that's and helped me be able to have that deeper relationship with the Lord. That's when things really started to change.
Wow. What a story. Stephen, that's a crazy journey you've been on with lots of ups and downs. But in all of it, it's crazy when you look back, you can hear you talking about God and God doing this, and how once we have that perspective and once we see things through the lens of faith, it drastically changes our outlook on life and on the circumstances we walk through. And I think that's so cool to see even your perspective on that, to go, God, you were in the middle of the difficult things. You were teaching me, you were protecting me, you were guiding me. And that is so good to just remind people that God, when it doesn't seem like He's there, He is still that good Father. He is still faithful. He is still working things out for our good, even when we can't see it and even when we don't feel like He's moving at all. Maybe we even feel like He's abandoned us. So thank you for sharing all of that. When you mentioned your marriage, I mean, man, that's a lot to go through at a young age, especially a marriage that's relatively new. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you guys have a child, the affair. There's just so many things that there's a lot of stress and strain on a young couple. So, what have you guys done to rebuild your marriage, to rebuild your trust, and to be healthier than ever?
Uh, so I like to say that we've been married for 10 years and we've been happily married for three. And the reason why I say that is because I even once I started kind of taking ownership for what I had done, I still really wasn't.
Yeah,
But then once I quit the job and I came home and I start diving into sermon series and I start reading my Bible every day and praying every day and I start working on me. And what I mean by that is there's so many people out there. It's like, well, self help has changed my life, but the best self help you can get is actually getting in the presence of the Lord.
Mhm.
Period. Because He can expose things to you, for you, specific to your situation.
Yeah.
It may not be affirmations. It may not be waking up at 4 in the morning and doing jumping jacks. It may be very specific to you. And that's where the Lord started really working on me. And once I started getting close to Him, and because my wife and I, we have our own separate relationships with the Lord. Because my faith should not be her faith, and her
Right.
faith cannot be my faith. So that's where, for most people, it's like, well, how does that make sense? Because when you start, marriage is a trinity, funny enough. And what I mean by that is you have the two human individuals and you have God at the top of it. If you look at it in that respect, it should be your relationship with the Lord, and their relationship with the Lord should lead you into deeper relationship together.
That's right.
So when we did that, when we started working on ourselves through the presence of the Lord, through praying, through fasting, I remember my first fast. My first fast, I was 280 pounds, and I thought I was going to die because I had these 2 jugs of Chuck Norris water that I had bought from the store next door. It was only a 24-hour fast. But for someone who's never done it and was overeating every day, I thought I was going to die. I was laying in the floor, curled up with the Chuck Norris bottle of water, and God was just, he's so good. I remember watching porn on a fast, needing a word from God, and he was good enough to still give me a word that I needed to change my life. But the thing that I want to demystify for people is you don't have to show up at the throne room of God and be perfect.
Yeah.
There was only ever one that was human that is perfect.
That's right.
None of us are perfect. And the reason why he sent his son to die was because he knew that he had to make up for our inadequacies. Nobody on this side of heaven will be perfect besides Jesus.
That's right.
Now, we are supposed to strive to be as closely related, as close to Christ as we can be, but we're still going to fall. We're still going to slip up. Even Paul said, if you could just remove this thorn from my side, and the Lord said, nah. So when I look at that in my life, I see that God's good even when I'm not good. And that's where, when I was able to sit there and actually let Him start working on those spots, and especially once I started exposing to Him, even though He knows, it's like, hey, I'm really struggling with pornography. You think you could just help me here? That's when He started helping me, is when I was able to own up and say, hey, this is a problem. And when I start removing things off of myself, start letting the chains fall off of me,
Yeah.
and I watch my wife do it for herself, that's where our relationship has been able to be beautiful, even through the hard times that have come since then. Because we're not depending on her to, I'm not depending on her to complete me, and she's not depending on me to complete her. There's only one that is a healer. There's only one that
Right.
is a restorer.
That's a good
So when
word.
we turn to Him, that's when we've been able to restore our marriage.
Yeah. That's so good because I think so many times that we want to fix our eyes on somebody else changing, and you talk about looking at yourself and what can Stephen do different? How can Stephen be changed, and how can God move in Stephen's life? And I think that is crucial in marriage, but also just in every area. If we start looking at ourselves and take ownership, then how much can we do? Because at the end of the day, we can't change other people. We only have the ability to can change how we're thinking and our actions. And so when we do that, we focus on ourselves, it gives us a different perspective. And at the end of the day, I think God does his best work when we say, God, here I am. Focus, help me, help me. And it sounds like he's done a great work in helping you and changing and transforming you, even sharing about the pornography. So many men struggle with that, and it can take such a stronghold. And people can feel like it's really not doing any damage, but it's doing tremendous damage to
Mm-hmm.
you and to your relationship, but it's especially for you because it can make your heart cold and hard, and that sin just takes root. And so it's amazing what God did in even bringing that out of your life and restoring a healthy relationship with your spouse and where you guys are today, and loving and serving together. So thank you so much for sharing about the journey in your own life with restoring your marriage. I'd love to know, as you think about the people around you that have made a difference. What have you seen as a guy in having male community, male relationships that help you in areas like the struggle with pornography or being the husband that you want to be? How do you think community is essential for us to walk out our faith?
So if you'd asked me that question at this time 2 years ago, I would say community is, you don't need it, because it's all about you and your walk with the Lord. And even at that time, the Lord was still working on me, where He said, "Hey, you need to go get in community." And I grew up and I used to hear this all the time, and some of you listening may have heard this too, is you are the sum of the five people you spend the most time with. And when I heard that, I said, okay, so I got to go find five millionaires so I can be the sixth. And I was so specific on who I wanted in my life that I was missing out on great relationships. And we got a part of a small group, and in that small group, I was sitting there and this is cool, we were able to have some community, but it wasn't the same as it is now. Like now, as soon as we moved to Tulsa, that's where, for me, the biggest part has been in getting into a men's small group.
Yeah.
I'm a part of a men's small group on Mondays, and in those small groups, you get to walk it out with other men. And what's funny is so many other men in that group have said the same thing. It's like, this is my first time in a group. I've always been the lone wolf. I always felt like I could figure it out. I always thought that it was just me and the Lord and we could figure it out. But it says in the Bible to share your burdens one to another. So if you're in community with other people that you can share your burdens with, that and they can say, hey, I've walked through that. Actually, here's a great resource. You're dealing with pornography, here, read this book. It changed my life. That's what the leader of our group did for a few of the guys in our group. And there's been people that have talked about suicide. Like for me, that was a thing that I struggled with as a kid, is I had suicidal thoughts. And so we're able to sit there and share authentically what we've walked through, or are walking through. And through community, you realize the biggest part about a community that I've realized is you're not alone. So often the enemy wants to make you feel like your problems are only your problems. No one will ever understand. If you tell people what you're walking through, they're going to look at you different. They're not going to want to be friends with you. They're going to kick you out. They're going to exile you. But really, there's so much freedom when you open your mouth and talk about where you're at.
That's
That's
right.
where you can finally get freedom. And being able to do that in a safe environment, like a small group, especially if you are a man and you're listening to this, is that is where you can finally break through. Because most of the time we bind ourselves up thinking that we can make it on our own, that there's no one can understand. But once you get into a community of other like-minded men, you can have freedom. And it is beautiful. And you can realize, hey, I have brothers in Christ. I can have armor bearers. I can actually walk this thing out. The enemy is actually much smaller than I thought. I've made him big in my life instead of making God big in my life. And being able to, and you can make the enemy small real fast. And when you do that through community, you can actually continue to keep it up. And we all hear about accountability partners, but when you're in a group of men and they're asking you, it's like, hey, how have you done this week? Well, I 4 days in a row I didn't watch pornography, but I fell off on this one day. It's like, hey, congrats on the 4 days. Next week it'll be seven. And just having people in your corner that support you, especially like-minded men, is key.
Yeah, and it's about, like you said, making God bigger. Because when you make God bigger, it's not just about what you're fleeing, it's what you're fleeing to. And I think
Yeah.
that's so important because a lot of times in accountability relationships, it's a focus on what you're trying to get away from. You become so consumed with what you're trying to get away from that you miss the good things that you're running toward, because ultimately it's finding something that is a true satisfaction, not a false idol or something that we're looking to or turning to that really isn't satisfying. When we begin to turn to the things that really do satisfy, it drastically changes it, and it doesn't become so much about, oh, slap my wrist, I did something wrong. No, there's something better for me, and I've tasted and I've seen that the Lord is good, and so I'm running toward that. I'm pursuing that. And when you do that with other brothers in Christ, there is strength in that. There's encouragement in that. There's that community is authentic. It's real. It's not something where you feel like you've got to fit in and do certain things to be a part of the group, because you realize that you're loved as you are. Just like God loves us as we are, that community around us rallies around us and loves us and journeys with us and sees that transformation. So glad you're in a group. Believe in groups. Believe it's important. Believe that, there's probably nothing as men that we could do that would impact our relationships more than to get in a group with other men pursuing
Mm-hmm.
Christ together, being vulnerable, sharing the things that are going. Because there's a lot of stuff that's real, that's hard, that we're facing. Like you mentioned, even the suicidal thoughts. Like so many men are wrestling with the weight that they're putting on their shoulders to provide for their family, to care for meet their needs, to be successful in their job or whatever they have going on. Instead of giving those to the Lord, they're putting them on themselves, and that isolation, that weight just can mount up to a place where like you shared, can be, those panic attacks that come, the depression
Mm-hmm.
that can come, the self-medicating with things that are not of the Lord. So thank you for modeling that. Thank you for being plugged into a group and sharing your own experience in that. You mentioned, kind of your own journey and sharing that. How have you seen the things that you've gone through God use to allow you to minister to other people? Because I think there's often so much power when we see, man, the stuff I went through, it was hard, but now
Hmm.
God's using it for his good and to help somebody else.
That's that's been the most mind blowing part about it all. And what I mean by that is I've been on well over probably almost 50 podcasts now, and most of them are business. And most of the time, I'm talking about taking a business to a million and how God did that, or most of the time, it's just took a business to a million. And then it was very interesting. Like God asked us to shut that one down, and now we're doing something else. And that's what most people know. But, and even going into Transformation Church, that was the story that we always told. That was it. And somebody connected us with Transformation, their staff, and said, "Hey, you need to record their testimony," because they had heard about the business and what God had done and what God was doing. And I think it was the week before we decided, or they decided that they were going to record. My wife comes to me and says, "Hey, the Lord spoke to me that we're supposed to talk about the affair." And I said, "Are you sure?" Because only about 6 people knew at that time. And she said, "Yes, I'm sure that's what we're supposed to do." So we walked in the room, and as we're walking in, the people are asking us, the producers are saying, "Hey, this is the story we've heard. Is that the story you're going with?" And we said, "No, that's not the story we're going with." And we said, it was actually over a Zoom call a couple days before. We said, "No, that's not the story we're going to go over. This is the story." And in that moment, she shares it. This is what we're going to talk about. And she starts crying. And the producer is saying, "If you feel that you can, then I know it's going to change people's lives." And we were nervous. So we walked in, we recorded it. It's on my Instagram. It's tagged right now, or pinned right now. And that was when it went live. There was, I think, 8 people knew, and that was because there was the producer and the camera guy.
Yeah.
And that, so it went from 8 people knowing to over 2 million people seeing it. Now I don't know, of course, metrics, all that stuff. I don't know how many people saw it. But one thing I do know is I just got back from LA, and I had people stopping me in the street saying, "Hey, you're the one who recorded the video about walking through the affair, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's me. That's me and my wife." And they say, "Thank you so much for doing that. It's incredible." This was just last week. There was people, one of the biggest things that I've seen come through the stories of the business, but especially the affair. The business, I've heard people sort of share. It's like, "Oh, thank you for talking about that. It's helping me through this season." But with the affair, there's been practical things I've seen happen. I saw where this lady from Nebraska flew in, and she's sat next to my wife, of all places. They start talking. The woman, her eyes get big, and she goes, "Wait, you're the lady who was on who did the testimony?" And we said, "Yeah, that was us." And she said that when she saw that testimony, she took it, sent it to her friends who were in the middle of filing for divorce, and they had the paperwork. All they had to do was sign, and it was over. And she sends it to them, and she said at this moment they're still fighting. She said they didn't sign. They decided to go get counseling. They're still together because of your testimony. And when I sit there and I hear stories like that, there's been a few other people that share stories similar. It just makes me want to cry, because like how good God has been. Because statistically for us, we've been through everything that should separate a marriage. We were young, married young, had a kid young, terrible finances, went bankrupt. We had walked through an affair. Like everything you could go wrong and you could do wrong, we did it all wrong. But yet God is good enough to keep us together and to keep us here and to not only sustain us, but to use our story to be able to impact others. So that's how he's restored us through it. And I love that he's using our story to restore other people's marriages as well.
Well, that's the beauty of story, because we all relate to somebody else's story in some way or another. So when we share our story, it connects us with different people that maybe somebody else would never be able to connect with. Because in reality, some people go, "Oh, I don't have a story." Well, sometimes your story is the fact that you grew up and came to know the Lord and feel like you lived a life of pretty much obedience, and that is your story, and that gives glory to God by sharing that you've had the grace to be able to run that race and be able to walk out your faith. But then there's also beauty in the story of somebody's life who is really wrecked and messed up, and God swoops in. He does his work. The marriage, the family, the relationship, the brokenness, whatever's there is healed and whole again because of what Jesus has done. And that is the beauty of story. And there's power in that. There's power in our testimony. We need to be able to share that. And, for me, that's one of the things at the Redeem that I really want to encourage guys. If you're uncomfortable getting on video, some guys are like, there's no way I'm going to video myself. Sit down and type out your story, share it with us so that we can share it with other people, because what you've gone through could be a huge encouragement and a tool that God uses to help somebody else who's struggling with the same things that you've struggled with. Or, it may be a family relationship that's been restored, that God changed, or marriage that's been restored. When you share that story and you speak that, it's an encouragement to other people, and God can use it to make a difference. Stephen, thank you for allowing your story with you and your wife, which is very difficult, that you've been willing to share that, willing to be obedient, willing to put that out on a platform where other people hear about it. And well, honestly, we're praying for your protection. I tell people
Yeah.
all the time, as soon as you share your story, be ready, because the enemy loves to steal, kill, and destroy. And there's few things as powerful as our testimony of what Christ has done in our life, that he would love to take that away from us. So we're praying for your protection. Thank you, though, for sharing. As you think back over your life and all that God's done, what was one of the hardest moments in all the journey that you walked through? Was it the affair? Was it the financial part? Was it the anxiety? What would you say was probably the most challenging season for you?
I would say, if I'm really honest, if I'm like really in my own house, I would say right now. And what I mean by that is when, because God restored us from the affair. That happened 7 years ago. When when I quit the job and then the business that we had got shut down, God restored us. We got $1 million business. Then he asked us to shut it down in March of last year. And it went from that to the very next month, the landlord's calling, hey, get out of the house. I'm selling it. We had 27 days to move out. Moved in with family that he was like a brother to me. He was my armor bearer. Then he stopped speaking to me 2 weeks later. It was a terrible experience. The Lord told us to move here 3 weeks after we came to a conference here in Tulsa, and the finances, just like, especially with the finances, not only the finances hadn't lined up, but it's been like every single part of us he has stripped away, because it talks about a branch apart from the vine it dies, but branches that are producing fruit he prunes.
Yeah.
And we're in one of those seasons right now where he's pruning us because he's getting us ready for the next one. And we've had so many words, so many prophetic words, so many things that have come to our life that we know what's coming next, but next hasn't happened yet. So we're still here, and in the middle of here, it's been such a interesting. And I was talking about it earlier about today. Is I'm just going to go spend time with him and say what's next, because he is basically refining every piece of our character right now, and being able to sit there. And I'm not just telling people stories on platforms about what he's done in the past. I'm talking about things he's doing right now. I mean, these are seasons I'm walking in right now. He's still working on our marriage. He's still wanting to refine us and make sure that it doesn't matter what comes, that we're not going to separate just because times get hard, that we're still turning to him, that he is our provision, that it's not how hard can I work, it's not what's my good thoughts, can I just make something happen. It is truly leaning on him. So right now in this season, now when I look back on those seasons were hard. But when I sit there and I look at the accumulation of all that pain and walking into this season where he's like, okay, I'm going to bring you here. I'm still going to be with you. I'm still going to speak to you. But are you willing to trust me if you don't see the result? And
Yeah.
because I have all the tools, I have everything that I need to be wildly successful, but yet it hasn't happened yet. And he's had to work out of me to stop being so results driven. And at the same time, are you willing to, if for him especially, it's like, are you still going to love me even if I don't give you what you're asking for? Or do you only love me when I give you what you want? And that's been the season that we're walking in, is truly refining our relationship with him. And just the thing is that people talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and being in the fire, and they came out and they didn't even smell like smoke. It's like, but they didn't come out the same. They went into the
Yeah.
fire We always hear about the story. It's like, hey, even if he doesn't, we still going to believe that God's good. They get thrown into the fire with an expectation that he's good. In the fire is when God showed up. And then on the other side of the fire, they walked out looking the same, but they were not the same. They knew that God would show up in the middle of their worst moment, in the middle of the thing that was supposed to take them out. So for me, as I feel as if we're in that furnace right now, and He's burning out the impurities in our emotions, in our spiritual walk, and I know that on the other side of that, He's with us here in the fire, but on the other side of that, when the blessings come, we will not be destroyed by them. And I want the people listening to it, especially men, we all see the mountaintop. We all want the mountaintop. But when you're walking through the valley is when you're getting refined, when you can actually fully depend on him. In the valley is where your character is built. So we're in one of those valley seasons at this moment, but he is refining our character for the mountain. And it's in this season still being able to praise him with everything I got when I don't want to. Still being able to say I love you, thank you when I don't want to. That's probably this has been probably one of those seasons that has been the most difficult.
It's a good word though about walking it out and your faith being the foundation of all of it because we don't ever know how long that valley is going to be. But
Mm-hmm.
we know that no matter how long we walk through the shadow of the valley of the shadow of death, that he is with us, that he will guide us, that he will direct us, that he will be faithful. Sometimes we can't see it, but we know
Mm-hmm.
it to be true, and we continue to cling to a promise that we might not always feel. And so your faith, you're walking that out day in and day out. Stephen, end of your life comes. What do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for. I think that's actually a fantastic question because most of the time when I talk about legacy, I don't know if I will be remembered. Because if you hear about that in Ecclesiastes from King Solomon, he's like, everything is meaningless. Life is just a vapor in the wind. And it's like, I'll be, the wise will be remembered just as the fool was remembered and all this stuff. But I sit there and I think, if I am remembered, what am I remembered for? And I want to be remembered for just living my life on the edge. And what I mean by that is living my life out on the water, just like Peter. Yeah, there's times I'm gonna look at the waves and be like, "Oh shoot, I'm going under right now." But I would rather be known for trying, for just trying to be closer to the Lord, for trying to be out here on the water instead of being in the safety of my own boat. I'd rather be out here in the waves, in the wind, in the storm, and know it's like, hey, God, you said that I could, so let me try. And if there's anything I could be remembered for, is just that, and being authentic with which part of the story I'm in. And did the feeding of the 5,000 just happen, and I'm hyped, and I'm forgetting the bread, or am I getting on the boat and I'm in the middle of a storm and I'm stepping out? Then it's like, what part of the story am I in? Or I'm in the part of the story where Jesus is pulling me out of the water. Because right now it feels like it's like, okay, I'm in the middle of the storm. He's having to kind of pick me back up and put me back on my feet in certain instances. But when I sit there and I look at my life, if I can just touch somebody through my story and they can not even remember it was me, but it changes their life and gets them closer to God, that's what I would love to be remembered for. Whenever I make it up there, there's going to be somebody that is going to say, hey, because of you doing this, it actually led me to Christ. And when I get to those pearly gates, being able to meet those people is what I would love to see at the end of my life. Because just being able to touch one person's life and them go touch somebody else's life, even with Philip being able to speak to the eunuch, and the eunuch, most people don't realize the eunuch went back and was like this very integral person of faith. And when he went and he was able to be almost like a father to the nations in faith, but Philip didn't know that. Like Philip didn't go with him. Philip ends up dying, and when he gets to heaven, he's going to be able to see. When he got to heaven, he was able to see all the people that his one decision made, like all the decisions that he made, that one moment, all the impact that came from it, and that's what I would love to see at the end of my life.
Love it. So good. Stephen, sorry, got to take a minute. I heard the door alarm at the office. I need to see if I can figure out. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Grubhub lost. Seriously, that's what it is. The office staff doesn't work on Friday, and she's literally here to for delivery of food, and she looks at me like so excited that I came to the door, and I'm like, it's not nothing. Anyway, all right, last thing, and then we done. So jump back in, Stephen. As we asked our guests on our episodes, would love to hear. Sorry, start back over. Stephen, what does redemption mean to you?
I love that question because redemption to me looks like when you can look back over your life and think, man, I was so dumb back then. And because I think that the enemy uses that to sit there and use shame and guilt. It's like, man, you were just stupid in that situation. It's like, I can't believe you made those choices. But I was able to have a conversation with a gentleman, and he gave me this piece of advice. And he said, if you look back over your life and you don't think that, then you haven't really changed. And there should be progress, there should be growth. And when I look back over my life, redemption to me is looking back and looking at every iteration of myself and thinking, wow, I'm so much further than I used to be, and being expected for where he's taking me. Because a lot of times we think of redemption as the hero story. So this is why I had this tragedy happen, and then I walked through this, and then I'm, Creed or any kind of one of those movies has this hero's journey, right? But to me, is the hero's journey is not so cut and paste as you were in the valley and then you're on the mountain. There is a progression, and especially on this side of heaven, you sit there and with Paul being content with much and content with little, is if you take away results, then what truly is redemption if it's not just growth? Do I look different here than I used to then spiritually? Am I closer to him now than I was then? Can I see how he's interwoven my entire life to get me here? And just being expectant, hey, he's taking me somewhere else, and being hopeful for the future. And that's my redemption arc, I would say, is realizing that every good, bad, ugly, indifferent thing that's happened in my life has all been to glorify the Father. And when it all glorifies the Father, which is what we're supposed to do with our lives, that's what redemption fully looks like to me.
Stephen, thank you for sharing that. Love what you shared with regards to redemption and personalizing it. It's always interesting every time we ask that question because redemption is something that God does for us, but we all have a personal side and a personal story to it. So thank you for sharing. Thanks for being on the show today. We really appreciate you joining us. Look forward to having you back again sometime soon. To those who are listening in today, if you have enjoyed what you've heard today, please rate or review us so that we can get this in the hands of other guys. Anytime you do that, it always helps spread the word about the Redeemed Man podcast. Thanks, and God bless.